The glass shattered in Michael Kennedy's hand as Alice whispered, "Sophie's not your daughter." Her words sliced through the laughter of the Portland wedding like a hidden blade. Under the twinkling string lights, 22-year-old Sophie twirled with her groom, Ethan, oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated in her father's world. Michael, a 48-year-old Marine veteran with silver at his temples, didn't flinch. His hazel eyes, hardened by years of service, locked onto Alice, his wife Linda's sister. She stood there, her black dress clinging to her like a shadow, her wine-soaked breath carrying a venom that had festered for years. Alice wasn't confessing. She was challenging him, her smirk daring him to unravel. Most men would have erupted, stormed across the wooden barn, and demanded answers. But Michael wasn't most men. His heart raced, but his mind was already mapping the terrain, calculating the next move like he once did in desert operations. The barn pulsed with music, the air thick with the scent of pine and champagne. Guests laughed, clinking glasses, while Sophie's radiant smile lit up the dance floor. Michael had built his life around that smile. Every late-night story, every scraped knee, every stubborn argument about curfews. She had his stubborn jaw, his way of tilting her head when thinking. Or so he'd believed. Now, Alice's words cracked that certainty like thin ice. He turned to her slowly, his voice low and steady, cutting through the noise. "Thank you, Alice. Your honesty is unforgettable." Her smirk wavered. She'd expected a scene, shouting, chaos, a public meltdown. Instead, Michael's calm was a wall she couldn't climb. He gave her a single nod, then walked away, leaving her clutching her glass like a lifeline that had just snapped. Outside, the cool Maine air hit him like a reset. He slipped into the coat room, the muffled thump of the band fading behind the door. Surrounded by wool jackets and faint traces of perfume, he leaned against the wall and exhaled. The truth wasn't new to him, not entirely. There had been moments over the years. Linda's vague stories about her solo trips in the late 90s. The way she'd brush off questions about her time in Boston. A photograph of Sophie at 6, her green eyes too vivid. Not quite like Michael's hazel or Linda's stormy gray. He'd buried those doubts, chalking them up to paranoia. But Alice hadn't just stirred those doubts. She'd set them ablaze. Michael's fingers found the small black envelope in his wallet. A gift from an old Marine buddy, Nick, who now ran a private lab in Seattle. "For when you need the truth more than comfort," Nick had said. Michael hadn't touched it in years, but tonight it felt like a loaded weapon. He needed answers, not accusations. Sophie's shawl hung over a chair in the corner, its burgundy wool catching the dim light. A single golden strand of her hair clung to it, delicate but heavy with potential. He plucked it carefully, as if it might break, and sealed it in the envelope. His phone buzzed as he typed one word to Nick. "Run." The coat-room door creaked, just the breeze, but it snapped him back to alertness. He pocketed the envelope and stepped out, the night air sharp with pine and possibility. Alice thought she'd lit a fire. She was wrong. She'd sparked a fuse, and Michael would control the burn. Slow, precise, and unstoppable. Back in the barn, he scanned the crowd. Linda stood near the bar, her auburn hair catching the light as she chatted with the florist, her smile polished and serene. She'd always been a master at appearances, gliding through their 20-year marriage like it was a performance. Michael didn't approach her. Not yet. Truth required evidence, and he was a man who waited for confirmation before acting. Alice lingered by the dessert table, her eyes darting toward him, searching for cracks. She wouldn't find them. Michael had survived ambushes, interrogations, and worse. This was just another mission, and he was already 3 steps ahead. He moved through the crowd, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, playing the proud father. But inside, his mind was a war room, piecing together fragments of the past. Linda's trips, her hesitations, the name that always made her pause. Richard Clayton. Clayton was a Boston art dealer, a friend from Linda's gallery days. Michael had met him once, a tall man with a smug grin and the kind of handshake that lingered too long. Linda had called him intense, which, coming from her, meant something. Michael's gut had flagged it years ago, but love had a way of silencing instincts. Not anymore. He slipped out to his truck, parked under a gnarled oak at the edge of the gravel lot. The night was quiet, save for the distant hum of the party. He didn't. The air smelled of earth and resolve. Michael didn't start the engine. He sat in the dark, letting Alice's words settle like dust after an explosion. Then he reached behind the passenger seat and pulled out a worn canvas pouch. Inside was his field journal, pages stiff from years of sweat and dust. He flipped to the tab marked 1998 to 2000. Dates, movements, notes. Linda's retreats were logged there. Boston, July 1998. Vermont, August 1999. He trusted her then, deployed half the year, believing her stories about needing space. Now, those entries read like a trail he should have followed. His phone buzzed. A message from Nick. Sample received. Results in 48 hours. Michael exhaled, his breath fogging in the cool air. The wedding was still in full swing, but for him it was no longer a celebration. It was the starting line of a hunt for truth, one that would either rebuild his family or burn it to the ground. He stepped out of the truck, straightened his tie, and walked back toward the barn. Sophie deserved a father who knew the whole story, and he'd be that father no matter what the truth revealed. Michael's phone buzzed in the dark. A single word from Nick. Received. The Portland night swallowed his exhale as he leaned against his truck. He wasn't chasing revenge. Revenge was a fire that burned the wrong things. He was chasing clarity, and every choice now was a step toward it. The wedding lights glowed in the distance, laughter spilling from the barn like a memory he couldn't trust. Michael, a 48-year-old Marine veteran, had spent 2 decades building a life with Linda, believing her smiles, her stories, her silences. But Alice's whisper, "Sophie's not your daughter," had cracked that foundation. His 22-year-old daughter, Sophie, was still dancing inside, her joy untouched by the truth that now haunted him. Michael's heart ached, but his mind was sharp, cutting through doubt like a blade through fog. He slid into the truck's cab, the air heavy with the scent of leather and pine. From a canvas pouch behind the seat, he pulled his field journal, its pages worn from years of disciplined notes. As a logistics officer, he'd survived by tracking details others overlooked, dates, routes, patterns. Now those habits turned inward. He flipped to 1998 to 2000, his pen scratching as he cross-referenced Linda's personal retreats. July 1998, Boston. August 1999, Vermont. She'd called them escapes to find herself, her auburn hair falling over her face as she brushed off questions. Back then, Michael was deployed half the year, trusting her vague postcards about art galleries and quiet towns. Now, those trips felt like footprints he'd ignored. One name kept surfacing, Richard Clayton. Linda had mentioned him years ago, a Boston art dealer who'd helped fund her gallery projects. Michael had met him once, a tall man with a slick voice and eyes that lingered too long. Linda had laughed off Clayton's intensity, but her fidgeting had stuck with Michael, a red flag buried under love's weight. If Sophie wasn't his, Clayton was the shadow in the frame. Michael's thumb hovered over his phone. Nick, his old Marine buddy, wasn't just a lab tech in Seattle. He had a knack for digging up what people hid. Michael typed, Linda Kennedy, 1999, Boston, Vermont. Hotels, flights. Cross-check Richard Clayton. No calls. Nick's reply was instant. On it. Michael pocketed the phone, his pulse steady. He wasn't a man who acted on hunches. He needed evidence, and Nick was his first move. Back at the wedding, he wove through the crowd, shaking hands, forcing smiles. Sophie caught his eye, waving from the dance floor, her green eyes sparkling under the string lights. Those eyes, too vivid, not quite his Hazel or Linda's gray, had always felt like a quirk, a gift. Now they were a question he couldn't unask. He nodded back, his chest tight with a love that no test could erase. In the quiet of the coat room, he checked Sophie's shawl again. Another golden hair clung to the wool, a backup in case the first sample failed. He sealed it in a second envelope, his fingers steady despite the weight of what it meant. The truth wasn't just for him. It was for Sophie, who deserved more than half-told stories. He texted Nick again. Second sample sent. Rush it. The reply came 48 hours. The next morning, Michael sat in his home office, the house silent except for the hum of the coffee maker. Linda was still at the venue, helping with cleanup, her absence a strange relief. He opened his laptop and reviewed his journal. August 1999 stood out, 9 months before Sophie's birth. Linda had spent a week in Vermont, claiming it was a solo trip to sketch in the mountains. Michael had been in Kuwait, coordinating supply lines, too buried in work to question her. Now he saw the gaps. No photos, no souvenirs, just her word. Nick's email arrived at noon, encrypted and concise. Linda had stayed at the Harborview Hotel in Boston, July 1998, and a small inn in Vermont, August 1999. Both reservations were linked to a credit card in Richard Clayton's name. Their flights overlapped, Boston to Portland, Portland to Burlington. The data was cold, clinical, but it burned. Michael closed the laptop, his jaw tight. Linda hadn't just wandered. She'd planned. He stood, pacing the room. The pain wasn't in the betrayal. It was in the years of trust he'd poured into a lie. But he pushed it down, focusing on the next step. He needed more than hotel receipts. He needed to know if Clayton was Sophie's father. And he needed Sophie to hear the truth from him, not Alice's venomous whispers. That evening, Linda returned, her smile strained as she set her purse on the counter. "Long night, huh?" she said, avoiding his eyes. Michael nodded, his voice neutral. "Yeah, busy." She didn't ask about his mood, didn't notice the journal tucked under his arm. Good. He wasn't ready to confront her, not until the lab results came back. He drove to a diner on the outskirts of Portland, the kind of place where waitresses called you Han, and nobody asked questions. Sitting in a corner booth, he sipped black coffee he wouldn't drink and reviewed Nick's findings again. Clayton had been in Boston during Linda's trips, his name tied to gallery events she'd attended. A photo from 1999, attached to the email, showed them together at an art show, Linda's hand on Clayton's arm, her smile too bright. Michael's grip tightened on the mug, but he loosened it. Emotion was a distraction. Truth was the target. His phone buzzed again. Nick, labs processing. Also found Clayton's travel logs. Matches Linda's Vermont trip. Digging deeper. Michael typed back. Keep it quiet. Focus on 1999. He leaned back, the diner's neon sign flickering outside. Alice had wanted to break him, but she'd miscalculated. Every new piece of evidence was a brick in the wall he was building, not to destroy, but to protect. Sophie deserved a father who faced the truth head-on, and he'd be that man no matter what the results showed. The diner's clock ticked past midnight. Michael paid for the coffee and stepped into the cool night, the stars sharp above. He wasn't just searching for answers. He was reclaiming the life he'd built with Sophie, one truth at a time. Michael's breath fogged in the dim light of the rusty Anchor diner as Richard Clayton's eyes widened. "You know why you're here," Michael said, sliding a photo of Sophie across the scratched table. The image, Sophie at 16, her green eyes daring the camera to blink, hit Clayton like a truth he'd dodged for decades. The Portland diner hummed with the clink of dishes and the murmur of late-night regulars. Michael, a 48-year-old Marine veteran, sat with his back to the wall, his hazel eyes locked on Clayton. The man opposite him, a Boston art dealer in his late 50s, looked smaller than Michael remembered, thinner hair, softer jaw, but the same slick confidence that had once set off alarms. Clayton's camel coat was too polished for this greasy spoon, but his manicured hands betrayed a tremor as he pushed the photo away. "I don't know what you want," Clayton said, his voice aiming for breezy but landing on brittle. Michael leaned forward, his tone steady, like a man reading a map he'd memorized. "Linda, 1999, Boston, Vermont. You were there. So was she." Clayton's gaze darted to the window, as if escape hid in the neon glow. Michael didn't blink. "You left traces, Richard. Hotel receipts. Flights. I found them." Clayton swallowed, his fingers tightening on the table's edge. "It was a long time ago. A short connection. Nothing serious." Michael's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "You were in my house. Sophie was a toddler running around. You looked at her. You knew." The accusation hung between them, heavy as the diner's stale air. Clayton's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "Linda said the kid was yours. I didn't push it. I had my own life." Michael slid a black envelope across the table, the lab seal glinting under the fluorescent light. "DNA results. 0% chance I'm her father. She's yours." Clayton's face paled, his breath catching. He opened the envelope, scanned the bolded text, and closed it like it burned. "What do you want from me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Michael's eyes didn't waver. "A sample. Confirm it. Or I go public, courts, lawyers, the works." Clayton nodded, defeated, his thumb tracing the envelope's edge. "Fine. I'll do it." Michael stood, leaving the photo on the table. "Don't contact Linda. Don't contact Sophie. You wait for my call." Clayton stared at the image, his expression a mix of shame and recognition. Michael walked out, the diner's bell jingling behind him. The night air was sharp, cleansing. He'd faced the shadow in his marriage and walked away with answers. But the harder conversation was still ahead. The next morning, Michael sat across from Sophie at Maple Brew, a cozy Portland cafe with mismatched chairs and the faint smell of burnt espresso. Sophie, 22 and radiant even in a simple ponytail, sipped her tea, her green eyes curious but wary. She'd always read him like a book, sensing storms before they broke. "You okay, Dad?" she asked, her voice soft. Michael placed the envelope between them, its weight heavier than the table could hold. "Before you open this, know one thing," he said, his voice thick but steady. "You're my daughter. Always will be. But you deserve the truth, not the stories we've all been told." Sophie's fingers hesitated, then lifted the flap. She read the results, 0% paternity, and her breath hitched. Her eyes, those vivid green eyes, welled up, but she didn't look away. "Did you know when you taught me to ride a bike?" she asked, her voice trembling. Michael's chest tightened, memories flooding back. Sophie wobbling on 2 wheels, her laughter louder than her falls. "I knew I loved you," he said. "That's all that mattered." Sophie's hand reached for his, gripping hard. "Mom called last night, said you're twisting things. That it's not true." Michael's pulse spiked, but he kept his face calm. Linda was already rewriting the story, trying to pull Sophie into her version of the past. "She's scared," Michael said. "But the truth doesn't bend. You decide what to believe." Sophie's lips parted, a question forming, but she stopped. Instead, she leaned across the table and hugged him, her arms tight like when she was 5, scared of thunderstorms. "You're my dad," she whispered, voice cracking. "No paper changes that." Michael held her, his throat burning. He'd braced for anger, for distance, but Sophie's trust was a lifeline. "If you want to meet him, the man who shares your blood, I'll make it happen," he said, pulling back to meet her eyes. "Your choice. Always." Sophie wiped a tear, her jaw set. "I might hate him, or I might not. But I need time." Michael nodded, pride swelling. She was stronger than he'd ever hoped. As they left the cafe, Sophie's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, Linda again, and silenced it. "She's not giving up," Sophie said. Her voice edged with frustration. Michael didn't respond, but his mind was already turning. Linda's desperation was a new variable, one he hadn't planned for. He'd given Sophie the truth, but Linda was fighting to bury it. The next move would need to be precise, not for revenge, but to protect the bond he and Sophie had just reaffirmed. Michael's voice echoed through the barn as he raised his glass, the microphone humming with quiet power. "To Sophie, my heart and my pride," he said, his eyes locking on his daughter's radiant smile. But then he turned to Alice, and the air shifted, charged with a truth ready to break free. The Portland wedding was winding down, the string lights casting a golden haze over the wooden beams. Guests leaned on tables, their laughter softened by champagne and late hours. Sophie, 22 and glowing in her white dress, sat beside her groom, Ethan, her green eyes bright with joy. Michael, a 48-year-old Marine veteran, stood at the center of the room, his tie loosened but his resolve ironclad. He'd faced Richard Clayton, confirmed the DNA results, and given Sophie the truth. Now, it was time to let the shadows of Linda's lies face the light. He cleared his throat, the mic catching the sound like a spark. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice warm but deliberate. "Sophie, you've made every moment of fatherhood a mission worth fighting for. Your stubbornness, your laugh. It's been my anchor." The crowd chuckled, Sophie wiping a tear with a napkin. Then Michael's gaze shifted to Alice, who sat near the dessert table, her black dress stark against the festive glow. Her wine glass paused mid-sip, her smirk frozen. "But there's one person I need to thank," Michael continued, his tone steady, almost kind. "Alice, your loyalty to family is unforgettable. You have a gift for revealing truths at just the right moment." The words landed softly, but their edge was unmistakable. Guests clapped politely, unaware of the undercurrent, but Alice's face drained of color. Her eyes darted to the exit, then back to Michael, searching for a trap. She forced a laugh, but it cracked, drawing curious glances from nearby tables. Michael raised his glass higher, his voice unwavering. "To truth, the kind that binds us, and the kind that sets us free." The room erupted in applause, but a murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward Alice, who fumbled her glass, spilling wine on her dress. She stood abruptly, muttering an excuse, and slipped out the barn door, her heels clicking like a retreat. Michael didn't follow her with his eyes. He didn't need to. The seed was planted, and the truth would grow on its own. He stepped off the stage, weaving through the crowd to Sophie. She looked up, her brow furrowed, sensing the shift. "What was that about?" she whispered. Michael knelt beside her, slipping a folded note into her hand. "Tomorrow noon maple brew. Just us," he said, his voice low. She nodded, clutching the note, and he kissed her forehead, the same way he had since she was a child. As he straightened, he caught Linda's silhouette near the bar, her auburn hair catching the light. She'd been watching, her smile gone, her hands gripping her purse like a lifeline. Later that night, Michael sat on the porch of their Portland home, the cool air sharp with pine. Linda hadn't come home yet. She'd stayed at the venue, claiming cleanup duties. His phone buzzed, a voicemail from Sophie. "Dad, Mom called again. She's saying you're lying, that the test is fake. I don't know what to think." Her voice trembled, caught between loyalty and doubt. Michael's chest tightened. Linda wasn't just defending herself. She was pulling Sophie into her web, trying to rewrite the truth before it could take root. He played the message again, each word a reminder of why he'd chosen clarity over chaos. Linda's desperation was a new challenge, one he hadn't anticipated. He texted Sophie, "I'll see you tomorrow. Trust yourself." Then he stood, the stars above unyielding, and walked inside. The house felt different now, its walls holding secrets he could no longer ignore. He pulled a legal pad from his desk and began drafting a separation agreement, his pen moving with the precision of a man who'd planned for every outcome. He wasn't ready to file it. Not yet, but he needed to be prepared. The next morning, Michael arrived at Maple Brew early, choosing a table by the window, the cafe's warmth a contrast to the storm brewing inside him. Sophie walked in, her ponytail loose, her eyes red but resolute. She slid into the seat across from him, her tea untouched. "Mom showed up at my apartment last night," she said, her voice low. "She brought old photos, said you've been distant for years, that you're making this up to hurt her." Michael's jaw clenched, but he kept his tone calm. "What do you believe?" Sophie's fingers traced the rim of her mug. "I saw the test, Dad. I know it's real, but she's my mom. I don't want to hate her." Michael nodded, his heart aching for her. "You don't have to hate her. You just have to choose what's true." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photo. Sophie at 5, grinning on her first bike, Michael steadying her. "This is us," he said. "No test changes that. But your mom made choices, and they're hers to carry." Sophie's eyes welled up, but she smiled, clutching the photo. "She's scared, isn't she?" Michael leaned back, his voice soft. "She's losing the story she's told herself for 20 years. That's her battle, not yours." Sophie nodded, her resolve hardening. "I told her I need space. I'm staying with Ethan for now." Michael's pride surged. She was navigating the truth with a strength he'd always seen in her. As they stood to leave, Sophie hugged him, her embrace fierce. "Thanks for not hiding it," she whispered. Michael held her tight, the weight of her trust grounding him. Linda's lies were unraveling, and Alice's gambit had backfired. The truth was out, and it wasn't a weapon. It was a bridge, one he and Sophie would cross together. Sophie's letter trembled in Michael's hand, her words cutting through the Maine dawn like sunlight after a storm. "Dad, you didn't give me blood, but you gave me life," she wrote. On their porch in the mountains, surrounded by pines whispering with frost, Michael felt the weight of 22 years settle into something new, freedom. The Portland wedding was a month behind them, its echoes fading like the string lights that had once lit the barn. Michael, a 48-year-old Marine veteran, had faced the truth head-on. Sophie, his daughter in every way that mattered, wasn't his biologically. Linda's betrayal, Alice's venomous whisper, and Richard Clayton's confession had unraveled a 20-year marriage. But Michael hadn't sought revenge. He'd sought clarity, and now, with Sophie by his side, he was building something stronger than the lies they'd left behind. The cabin they'd moved to was small, its cedar walls warmed by a wood stove that crackled softly. Outside, the mountains of Maine stretched under a sky sharp with stars. Michael and Sophie had chosen this place for its quiet, a canvas to repaint their lives. She'd left Portland to stay with Ethan, her new husband, but spent weekends here, her laughter filling the space where doubt once lived. The letter, slipped under his coffee mug that morning, was her way of sealing their bond. Michael leaned back in his chair, the porch creaking under his weight. The letter was short, written in Sophie's looping script. "You taught me to ride a bike, to tie knots, to stand up when I fall." It read, "No test changes that. You're my hero, Dad." His throat tightened, pride and relief mingling like the frost on the railing. He folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his jacket pocket next to a photo of Sophie at 5, grinning on that wobbly bike. Truth hadn't broken them, it had set them free. Linda and Alice had faced their own reckoning. In Portland, whispers followed them. Friends stopped calling, invitations dried up, and neighbors' smiles turned polite. It wasn't punishment, Michael knew, just the natural consequence of choices. Linda had sent him a letter of her own, delivered to the cabin a week ago. "I'm sorry," she wrote, her words shaky. I was scared to lose you, so I lied. I hope you can forgive me. Michael read it once, then set it in a drawer. Forgiveness wasn't his to give yet. It belonged to Sophie, who was still navigating her mother's betrayal. He'd filed for separation, the paperwork clean and final, drawn up in his precise hand. The house in Portland was on the market, its memories too heavy to carry. Linda hadn't contested it. She'd moved to her sister's place, her silence louder than any argument. Alice, for her part, had left town, her social media gone quiet after the wedding. Her attempt to fracture their family had backfired, exposing her own bitterness. Michael didn't dwell on their fall. His focus was forward, with Sophie. The cabin wasn't just a retreat, it was a new start. Michael had started teaching survival skills to local kids, showing them how to read a compass, build a fire, find north by the stars. Sophie joined him, her patience with the children a mirror of his own. One afternoon, a shy boy named Tim, all elbows and freckles, had fumbled a knot until Sophie knelt beside him, guiding his hands. "You've got this," she said, her voice steady. Michael watched, his chest swelling. She was his daughter, blood or not, and she was carrying his lessons into the world. That evening, they sat by the wood stove, the fire casting shadows on the walls. Sophie stirred her tea, her green eyes catching the glow. "Mom texted again," she said, her tone neutral. "Wants to meet, says she's changed." Michael sipped his coffee, letting her words settle. "What do you want?" he asked. Sophie sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't know. Maybe someday. But not now. I need to figure out who I am first." Michael nodded, respecting her pace. "You'll know when you're ready. And I'll be here." She smiled, then pulled a small box from her bag. "Found this in Ethan's attic," she said, opening it to reveal a fishing lure, its feathers frayed. "Remember when I broke your favorite rod?" Michael laughed, the sound deep and unguarded. "You were 9, swearing you'd catch a whale. I was prouder of your grit than mad about the rod." Sophie grinned, tossing the lure to him. "Keep it. For luck." He caught it, the moment anchoring them like the pines outside. Their weekends grew into a rhythm. Mornings teaching kids, afternoons hiking, evenings sharing stories by the fire. The community noticed, inviting them to lead workshops at the local rec center. Michael taught navigation. Sophie taught resilience, her humor disarming even the shyest teens. They were rebuilding not just for themselves, but for others, proving that truth could heal as much as it hurt. One night, under a sky thick with stars, Sophie looked at Michael, her breath fogging in the cold. "You could have walked away," she said, "after the test. Why didn't you?" Michael met her gaze, his voice steady. "Because you're my daughter, and love doesn't quit." She hugged him, her arms fierce, and for the first time in months, Michael felt whole. The past, Linda's lies, Alice's betrayal, Clayton's cowardice, faded into the distance, like a storm that had passed. Michael and Sophie had chosen truth, and it had given them wings. They weren't running from the pain. They were building on it, stronger, together. Moral: lies chain us to the past, but truth opens the door to a future worth living.